Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Patch Notes podcast brought to you by Entity eSports, your one-stop shop for esports news, gaming patch notes, and the occasional interview or two. I am, as always, joined today by my co-hosts, Nathan, aka Goose,
Hello, hello.
and Braden, aka Psychotic.
What's up?
And we have with us today a special guest, Saukko. He is the founder of SCS, a Tier 3, I believe, esports league for Rainbow Six Siege. Saukko, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, definitely happy to be here.
All right, well, let's get down to the patch notes. So one of the first questions I kind of wanted to start out with, seeing that you have an esports league that competes primarily in Rainbow Six Siege, when were you first introduced to Rainbow Six Siege?
So me as a player or the SCS in general?
You as a player, like when was the first time you saw or
definitely.
picked up Rainbow?
So I had originally gotten a copy. This was years ago when the game first came out. I had gotten a copy for Xbox, right? And I was still in high school and I was all about like Call of Duty and things like that back then and Halo. And so Rainbow Six was completely new to me and I didn't understand it. So I just sort of put it on the back burner for a while. But eventually I'd gotten a pretty decent PC. And this was back around year 3 of Rainbow Six. I think it was, what was it? Maybe season 2. I think that was like Maverick and Clash's season when they did the rework of Heathrow or not Heathrow, but Hereford.
Hereford, yep. I believe that was Grim Sky, yeah?
Grim Sky, that's it. It's slipping my mind right now just because I've got so much going on. But yeah, that was when I first started getting back into it on PC. And for a while I didn't have the greatest PC, so I wasn't that competitive with it. I just sort of played it to have fun. But then eventually I upgraded my PC to what I have now. And that's when I started really finding out like, oh, there's a pretty big comp scene. It's not just Pro League. So
You know what? That was really interesting. So you mentioned that you came from more of like a Call of Duty kind of standpoint, more of a run and gun kind of style. And what really appealed to you about the more strategic nature of Siege?
So yeah, basically as a kid, my first game that was a shooter was Halo. So I had sort of grown up on those style of games, the traditional, I guess you can call them a traditional, just running gun shooter. So what really drew me to Siege is as I got older, I got more, strategic. Like when I started getting into PC gaming, I was really big into like real-time strategy and stuff like that. So I like devising plans around what to do instead of just sort of going and executing something. I think that's a game is really fun like when you can think about it instead of just focusing on running and gunning. I think like there's definitely value to that, but I think if you have a game that does both, which is Rainbow Six Siege, it's a really interesting sort of mechanic. So I would say that's really sort of what brought me over, I guess, from those original ones. I still occasionally play COD, but still not to the same degree that I have Siege. I don't know how many hours I've put in at this point, probably like close to 1,500, honestly, on Siege or more. So
Yeah, I get that on COD. After a while, it just gets kind of boring just basically just holding down your trigger whenever you're just running around the map.
right.
And when you come to Siege, it's like, okay, now I actually have to put a bit more of skill and thinking into this game and not just run in, unless you're a Ash main.
Oh Lord.
Well, that is something interesting that we've kind of seen is we've seen a lot of people who have shifted over from traditional run and gun styles to more of a strategic, thought out game like Siege. So you did mention that when you started first getting into Siege, that you played around pretty casually for a while, and then you got into the competitive scene for Siege once you realized that there was more than just Pro League, obviously. So for those of our listeners who don't know, which there are actually quite a few, can you kind of explain how the tiers of esports works for Rainbow?
Yeah, definitely. So Rainbow Six is traditionally a 4-tier system is the best way I can sort of describe that. There's also collegiate Rainbow Six, but I like to classify that one as different because there's a whole wide range of teams on there um, that all sort of fill in different tiers. Because some schools, excuse me, have teams that are like T2 level because of their players that they have, and then some are like T4 that are just getting into the collegiate scene. So I like to just leave them aside in their own separate right. But if we're looking at just traditional team lineup, you've got T1, which is your NA Pro League, APAC Pro League, and EU Pro League scene. So your big name teams like G2, TSM, um, starting to see more from E United, especially after recently. So those would be your T1 teams. T2 is basically your minor league. So essentially what you're looking at is challenger leagues, if you're familiar at all with Rainbow Six esports. So they just have the qualifiers for those, but that's basically if you win those challenger leagues like that, you get put into a higher tier like pro bracket. So T2 teams are ones that can compete with pro teams, but just haven't hit that next level yet. Then we see T3. So T3 is basically a good comparison would be baseball, I feel like, because in baseball you have the majors, then you have, like 2 tiers of minor leagues, I feel like, if I'm remembering correctly. So T3 would be just that next step down in the minors. So like maybe you've just, to put it into a comparison, you just get drafted by a team, you're put into their like feeder team system, which is sort of that. Like T3 is a lot of up and coming really strong players or teams that have aspirations to get into the big minor leagues, I guess you could call them. So that's where we sort of sit with SCS, since that's where I'm most familiar, is that T3 scene. And then there's T4, which is, it's still a competitive scene, but I would like to describe it more of like a casual competitive scene, because the teams are, either brand new or players that are newer to competitive will join those sort of leagues. So that's a pretty good comparison there, I think.
You know what? I do think that is a very, very good explanation of the 4 tiers of Rainbow Esports. And I think it'll be especially helpful to people, like I said, who listen to the podcast and are necessarily going, oh, what's Rainbow? What's this pro league? What's the different systems they talk about? So I think that was a very, very good explanation of kind of how the different tiers of esports work for Rainbow.
Awesome.
So wait, so you run a tier 3 league, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So when did you decide that you wanted to create a Rainbow Six Siege esports league? Like, when was like that first idea put in your head?
It was sort of a spur of the moment thing, because I had been playing for a couple teams since I think it was winter 2019 going into like early 2020. That's when I first started playing competitively, and I jumped around a couple different teams, played in a bunch of different leagues. And what really sort of got to me originally, and this is before even the SCS name came around, was back in March, once quarantine happened, obviously. I was like, you know what? We need something fun to do. There's a couple leagues that are going on right now, but the quals aren't happening. And a lot of my friends, because I was more of like friends with a lot of players than I was a league organizer at that time. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to get together a small tournament for a couple of my friends that can just throw together teams, and I'll even put in like a little prize pool, So that was my first event. It was back in March, and it was 8 teams in a single elimination bracket, and I funded like a $100 or $200 prize pool. So it was tiny. And I streamed it, and it surprisingly did really well. This was back on my personal Twitch too, and it was some of the biggest numbers that I'd seen. Like, we were pulling like 60 viewers for some of these games, and I mean, there were teams that nobody's ever even seen before. It was just a bunch of random people that had gotten together and said, you know what, let's play this weekend. So that was pretty exciting. And that's about that same time I had been on a team with my now co-owner with SCS, and that's Ferme, and he was like, you know what, let's keep building this. I brought him on to help with the second tournament that I had run, and that's when we rebranded to Siege Central Station, because the first one I just called it some random name, but the second one I turned it into Siege Central Station. I rebranded my server and everything like that. And again, we hosted it on my personal Twitch, but we actually had some bigger teams. Like, we see the Wichita Wolves played in that one. We had Drift Esports play in that one. Full Metal Gaming, a couple other pretty big organizations actually signed up to play in that one. We had an entry fee, and it went amazingly well yet again. That was in April. So after that point, we tried running a third. We were still going for that 16-team bracket mentality, but nobody was really signing up, because that was when qualifiers for a lot of leagues were happening, things like that. And so Ferme and I, we got together, and he suggested sort of, why don't we try doing a league? Because we had seen, and this is not going to come, I'm not going to come across as like trying to, say anything bad about anybody in particular, but we had noticed in T4 and T3 Siege especially, a lot of leagues aren't really built for the players. They're built really for either league administration, that are trying to like build something big for them, or they're built for, and sometimes we see like monetary gain as well, because like some of the like entry fees and stuff like that that come out just don't line up. So we were like, you know what, we're and also just league administration in general, not really, knowing how to run things effectively. Because when you're a team that gets hit with administrative decisions that make zero sense, or rules are being changed on the fly and that sort of thing, it's very frustrating. So we came at it with that mentality, like, let's make a league where we can combine the best aspects of everything together, and let's give it a shot. And so we ran our qualifiers, and surprisingly, we had a ton of interest. Like, we filled our qualifiers in maybe 2 weeks. Like, we had a sign up period of about a month, and by the end of the second week, we had basically filled up our qualifier spots, which is huge for a league that had never been around before. So we got into it, and we started planning for the season, and we went with the mentality of, let's produce every single game. Let's not miss anything. We're going to run statistics for our teams. We're going to, have the best graphics. We're going to have the best administration. We're going to have a rule book that actually details every potential situation that could happen. So that way we don't run into a situation where teams don't know what to do, or, administrators have to, come up on the fly. Like, we thought of all that and we put it together. SCS happened, and now we're going into the playoffs this week. And we've been partnered by Faceit to run tournaments with them. We've been, contacted by a ton of big name teams, and now we're having some of the biggest T3 teams, and some that have even made really long runs into T2 play as well, that are actually coming out and competing for season 4 quals. So, it's just that mentality of trying to be the best, not necessarily for yourself, but for the teams and for the players, that I think that we're really excelling in that department. So sorry for the long-winded thing there, but I'm passionate about this for sure.
Yeah,
No
that's
problem,
really
man.
great.
Yeah, we totally respect and understand that passion. It is really something to try and make it work for the players, and that's something we've kind of seen with some of the other people in the past that we've interviewed. Is that they really do the people we do find really do seem to be passionate about their work and passionate about what they do, and trying to make sure that everybody has the best time possible.
Yeah.
So, do you guys take any teams, and like do they contact you, or do you contact them? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, so for the original couple seasons, when it was just like the bracket tournaments, and even for season 3, I had to do a lot of promotion. And that's my role. Is I'm the original founder, sure, but Ferme and I split sort of the league in the operations sense, where I do a lot of the front end. So I'm talking to a lot of teams, running social medias, directing casting and stuff like that. And then Ferme is doing a lot of he writes all the music. He does all the graphics by hand. Like, we do all in-house production and everything like that. So we sort of split the labor on that. So with myself being the front man almost in a way, I have to sort of reach out and do a lot of the communications with sponsors and teams. And so for season 3, since nobody really knew who we were, I really had to go out of my way to try and find people to come in for qualifiers. But that all sort of changed for season 4, because I still DM'd potential teams that I saw hadn't signed up yet. But as soon as we opened qualifiers, within the first week, we had about like 25 signups, and the majority of those were really high tier T3 teams already. So it's just the fact that a lot of people have noticed that, hey, there's this new league, it's SCS, but they're doing things right, and they have an amazing, mentality. They treat their teams well, and the prize pool is nothing to sneeze at for T3 either. I think we have the highest T3 prize pool of any league in NA. I would argue. I just looking at some of the others, which is actually 2,000 is our prize pool for season 4 now. So, but yeah, a lot of teams noticed for season 4 that we were doing a lot of these great things, and they wanted to come out. But yeah, before that, I had to talk to quite a few people. I have DM chains with probably 100 people at least from way back when. But
So, how did you used to promote your SCS?
it was a lot of sort of reaching out to people or friends that I knew ran teams, and a lot of that came from people that worked with SCS, in particular Chief or Ferme or anybody like that, that sort of knew, like, hey, this person's with X team and this person's with Y, or just DMing their organizations on Twitter, stuff like that, that really has contributed. I mean, sometimes people just don't respond, which is fair. I mean, sometimes people just don't check DMs, but when they do, I mean, the majority of the time they're always like, oh yeah, we were already definitely considering it. We were just setting up our registration, or they're like, yeah, give us more info. We're definitely interested. So it's pretty exciting when you are able to talk with a team that you as a player have always been like, man, it would be really cool to like either play against them or cast them or whatever. And then they're already signed up and saying like, yeah, we want to be a part of your league. So it's just a really good feeling.
You know, and it certainly does seem like your league offers a lot of merit in terms of the prize pool, in terms of the personal kind of touch. What else do you think that your league does to differentiate itself from the other T3 leagues out there? You know, I'm thinking the likes of Cardinal League, Omega League, I believe, is also another competitor of yours. So what else do you do to kind of differentiate yourself from those other leagues?
So I will go ahead and say that with T3 the way it is, the leagues that I'd classify as T3 and in our competition bracket right now would have to be probably EPS is one of them. I would say ESA is up there as well, and then RSA is coming back, and they were a pretty big T3 as well. So those three leagues I would say are in the same sort of bracket with us in terms of competition right now, because the rest of them, they all specialize in like certain areas. You know what I mean? Like Upsurge has really good administration, but they don't produce a lot of games. They don't really cast a whole lot of things, which is fine. But at the same time, you know, teams like being casted. Omega, I know that they're getting back into it. I haven't seen a whole lot, honestly, from them yet, and they have a really big league. They have like a 16 team bracket, so I'm not sure exactly how they run things. I haven't really run into a lot of them just yet, but I would say what sets us apart from like EPS and RSA, ESA, and those leagues is that first off, we do everything in house. You know, we don't have to outsource to other organizations. Like I know EPS has to use Siege GG for their statistics. We don't. We have Ferme, who has come up with a statistics program that legitimately we have a team of analysts that watch all the games. They are desk analysts as well. They can comment on things, and you're going to see that tonight if you guys watch the cast for the playoffs. But basically what they do is they're inputting data into those forms, which gives us real-time updates on statistics for our players, for us to use in the cast, things like that. So that's something that's really amazing. We don't have to wait for anybody to do it for us. We just do it ourselves in that regard, which is really cool. Another thing as well with our graphics, we don't outsource that at all either. We have Ferme, who was the brain behind those as well, because he's really good with his computer programs like that. So he was able to create this graphics package, and it's all modular and it's all in-house. So basically what he can do is he can send our package to, you know, one of our graphics people. So myself included, you know, I'm going to start helping out with that, or any of our producers. And all we have to do is basically just input data. So like, we don't have to worry about, you know, going to somebody else and saying like, hey, we need you to update our package for tomorrow's stream. We can just have it all done in 30 minutes the night before, you know, because we all do it ourselves there. So that's probably our biggest thing that sets us apart right now, is that SCS actually has that complete package of being able to do it all ourselves, which is really amazing. But another thing that sets us apart too, and you can ask any of our teams from season 3, they would say that SCS is probably hands down the most engaged and involved league, involved league with all the teams, orgs, and players, because that's the thing too, is we see sometimes where there's not a whole lot of representation for players and things like that, or orgs or whatever it might be. So on social medias, on casts, we're highlighting them all the time. And I mean, there was a strain that we put out as well, or a message string on Twitter, where we actually went through and we created specific graphics for the end of the season for all the teams that didn't make it to the playoffs. And we wrote a little bit about like their impact on the league. We gave them a graphic with all the final statistics of their players and their Twitters and everything like that. So, you know, that's a really cool environment as well, as we're fostering like a community. It's not necessarily just a competition, it's a community as well. Like all the teams get, you know, they get along really well with each other, and they're still like putting out top tier gameplay every week. So it's really interesting. I would say those two things are probably what sets us apart the most. Yeah.
So your streams, are they strictly like competitive gameplay, or are there also like events that you host every now and again, or you yourself playing Siege?
So we don't really do personal streams on there. We don't really have an intention to get like a stream team as of yet. So we're not really going to have just people on there. But at the moment, it's strictly competitive gameplay for our Rainbow Six season. But with our partnership with Face It, we're going to be doing weekly tournaments, similar to like if you've played in Go Fours before or the Open Siege series that Face It is running itself. But the way we're going to be doing it now is we want to sort of bring in the SCS flair to those events. We're calling them Go Storm. And it's going to be every Saturday, basically, where it'll be a 64 team bracket. We cast one game from every round, which is something that no other weekly tournament has done. Is we're going to actually like full on produce those. So you'll see that on the channel as well. And in the future, we're looking to expand probably first to Valorant as another game. So you're going to see some Valorant gameplay on there. But we're pretty much primarily going to be geared to the competitive side of things. If we ever, get involved with potentially like, I don't know, maybe like a talk show or something like that with all the casters or something from the week where we talk about our teams, that might be something in the future. But at the moment, we're looking strictly at either our competitive leagues or weekly events, whatever we might be having. So.
Well, that is certainly quite an accomplishment, and it does seem like, you really do put that personal touch into the league and into all the teams that are a part of SCS. So, what do you think has been like your biggest stumble or some of your biggest obstacles while trying to create, a league of such size?
Now that's a tough question because I can't necessarily say that we've really had any big stumbles or anything like that. I think everything is run really smoothly, and I think that's just the nature of our system is we have a whole lot of backups for things. We don't really have to worry too much about things like that. Like obviously we have stuff prepared in case anything did happen like during a cast or something of the sort, but we haven't really run into any situations where I would really classify it as like a misstep or anything like that on our part. I think the biggest thing that we've had to worry about is unfortunately our head producer Galaxis. She's down in Florida, and with the current hurricane that happened, a tree fell down and basically demolished her house to some degree. So obviously that's huge for her, and we're all trying to support her as best we can during this, but that was a huge setback as well for SCS because she leads our productions for pretty much every stream that you've seen so far. So we had to, in the span of probably 3 hours, get Ferme to fully have the stream package on his OBS so he could produce, and we did it, and it runs basically flawlessly, I'd say. As well, I don't think you could really notice a difference between our cast before and after Ferme had to take over production for the near future. So that's probably like the only thing that we've really had to emergency switch over, was just because nature happens, and we realize that. But I wouldn't really say we've had any sort of major issue, I guess is a good way to put it.
Well, I mean, that's certainly something good to hear. I mean, not a lot of success stories come without their fair share of difficulties. So it is a good thing to hear that, you guys have managed to do something really good for the players and really good for yourselves, without any major pitfalls or major stumbles along the way. I do have to ask you, what is your favorite part about owning a league or about working with a league?
Ooh, now I think this is another question where the answer could really vary per person, because Ferme might say something different along the lines of, getting to implement like his sort of creative vision, because he's like a really creative mind. So he gets to do a lot of that with his graphics and his music and his statistics and things like that. But for me, I think I'm a people person. I study psychology. I love talking to people. I love meeting new people. So that's probably my favorite part, is I get to bring all these people together, and create that community like I was talking about earlier, because that's something that is really needed, honestly, in Siege, because a lot of times you see there's not too much of like a, what's a good way to put this? There's a community, but they're not very interactive with each other. There's individual groups. Like there's this group that likes this team, there's this group that likes this other team, but a lot of times you don't really see that meshing. But SCS is really doing a good job of being able to like bring those people together almost, and it creates an awesome environment. So I love seeing stuff like that happen. So that's probably my favorite part of being an administrator, is just being able to like foster that growth for just Rainbow Six esports in general.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of community stuff that you must do in SCS, especially knowing a lot of your community since you talk to so many of them. Some of us being some of those people that you have communicated with.
Yes, I was especially surprised when we signed up for the SCL League, and then I got a message from you saying, "Hey, saw you were the captain of Entity Esports. Might you be interested in qualifiers for our league?" And I was like, you know what, that sounds like some heck of a deal there. So, it is certainly interesting, because for those of you who don't know, when I say it's presented by Entity Esports is the company that I have created, or the esports organization that I've tried to create, that is currently working with Rainbow Six, and SCS was one of the leagues that we were considering entering into. I think the qualifiers for this year were just a little bit too early for us. We're still kind of getting our team up and running and underway, but for sure we would probably be interested in popping in and joining in potentially one of the qualifiers coming up. Goose, you said you had a question?
I do have a few questions, but I've just got this one now. Do you plan on expanding your league in the future to greater lengths?
I can definitely talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it too in depth because I don't want to give everything away. I already mentioned that we have potential plans to extend into Valorant, which would be huge as well, because both myself and Ferme really see Valorant as the next big competitive title, because he comes from a background of CS:GO and then Rainbow Six, and I come from a background of just Rainbow Six. But we all see that Valorant is really turning into one of those big games. So we're definitely broaching the opportunity of that, but we're also potentially looking at other regions. So I'm not going to go into too much depth about that, but I think that you might be seeing something big from us in the future in that department. So
that certainly does leave a little bit of mystery there to be uncovered. So,
right.
I do have another question here. So, you talked a lot about expanding into Siege from COD, and obviously streaming on your personal channel originally. Do you still stream and create content for your own self brand, or do you mostly focus on League content at this point?
I pretty much focus on League stuff. Every once in a while, I will stream. It's just for fun though. But with being a League administrator, it does take up quite a bit of time on that front, because I'm present at pretty much every single game that we run. And then on top of that, I have school. So the days that I'm not running SCS, I'm really taking care of like business in that regard and making sure that I'm on top of both things. So I don't really do a whole lot of content production for myself anymore, but that's all well and good, honestly, because I mean, SCS was, to put it in a good analogy, SCS is basically like my baby, right? I'm trying to get it to grow, so it's almost like I'm producing content for myself, but in a different way, I guess is a good way to put it. But I'm happy with where I'm at. Honestly, I wouldn't change anything. So
All right, so I know it wasn't too long ago when you created your league, but what would you tell your past self at like the start of creating your league?
ooh, yeah, that's a really good question. If I knew exactly how big SCS was going to be in just one season of being an actual league and not doing the tournament ideology, I would have potentially gone back and looked into doing tournaments, or excuse me, doing leagues straight away. Obviously having the knowledge that I have now, because I think it's been integral to really have everybody's input that's worked with SCS so far. So if I knew everything that I knew now, I would go back and potentially say, yeah, let's start running the league earlier, because then I think SCS would be potentially the biggest T3 league right now, but at the same time we're already on track to being that anyway. So it's not really too much of a change. So either way, I think I'm happy where I'm at. But if I were to go back, I would say, yeah, let's just get into the league aspect a little bit sooner, because I think that would have been very helpful. because obviously tournaments are really cool and they're good to run once you're established, but
A league is where it's at, kind of deal.
Definitely. Yeah, tournaments are awesome because they're like they're really interactive. So that's the thing, I guess. So a little bit of an aside is a league is something that brings in a whole lot of people to your organization, right? And then a tournament is really good to run once you have that community built up, because then you don't really need to search for people. They'll automatically like have that in front of them to sign up for. So it's really good to run if you want to just get more community engagement, and more casual engagement instead of just being limited to 12 competitive teams. So I think that's why running tournaments when you're established is a really good thing. But definitely a league is something that really attracts a lot of people, especially if you can do it as well as as is expected from a lot of T3 teams. So
Well, that is certainly something interesting. You mentioned it bringing in a lot more people, and you talked however many minutes ago about SCS being more of a community and doing all these graphics for the players who maybe didn't make it into the playoffs, but they'll definitely be back again next year. So what would you say is probably the best thing you've ever seen out of the community, or something that you just really like has made you think, I am so glad that I have invested this much in my community and made it
Oh
such a
man.
welcoming place?
Oh man, where do I start? Let's see. Okay, so yeah, there's been a lot of in-game stuff, especially at the tail end of the season. Like when teams knew that they couldn't make the playoffs just because of their like point positioning and stuff like that in the standings, the games were still really uber competitive, but we got to see a lot of really interesting op picks, because that's the cool thing about our statistics is it details like which operators have and haven't been picked. So like we got to see some really wacky plays. Like we got to see a Tachanka spawn peak play. We got to see a Caviera come into play, Capcan, all the operators that are typically not in the competitive meta right now. They got to come out because of that, and the players were having an amazing time while they were still competing. You know what I mean? Like the games were still really close. Nobody was remotely even close to quote unquote throwing, to call it that. And everyone just wanted to, have a good time while still playing in the top level. So it was really cool to see. And another thing too is I would have to scroll down in the Twitter notifications like way, way deep just to find it, because it was a while ago. But a lot of people, as soon as they found out they weren't making the playoffs, they got to Twitter and they were like, "Oh man, such a disappointment that we couldn't make the playoffs this season, but watch out for us. We're coming back for season 4." Like you have all these teams that no matter how their season went for them, they're already dedicated to becoming better and coming back yet again for season 4 quals. And it's just amazing, because you've built something that everyone is enjoying when, even though your record might not be where you want it to be, they're still like, heck yeah, we're coming back for another round. We want to do this again. We want to be the top team next season. You know what I'm saying? It's really awesome to see that.
Yeah, being able to manage that competitive aspect in your in SCS, and being able to keep these players active and wanting to play is something that is very cool.
All right, so we talked a little bit about, you talked a little about your community and how much, they come in and they support, and, like I was saying, and you basically backed me up on that, they're like, oh, didn't win this year, we'll come back again next year. So, I do kind of got to ask, so how has your production team expanded since you originally started? So you mentioned it was
Oh,
you
wow,
and a
yeah.
co-founder in the beginning. So could you speak a little bit more to like, who have you brought on as far as casters, and how has your production schedule and way of doing things kind of changed since your inception?
Definitely. So first ever tournament that I ran in March, it was literally me as a caster, an observer, and the streamer. I was running 3 things at once on my computer with a co-caster, and his name is Victor, who's since taken a step back from Rainbow Six. But Victor, he was an awesome friend of mine. We played on multiple teams together back in the day, and he was the person that I brought in. I was like, "Hey, do you want to help co-cast this? I think it'd be fun." And he said, "Yeah." So he got involved with it. We made it through the first one, and that's when he decided to take his step back from Rainbow Six, because he was done being on a competitive team and he wanted to take a break from like competitive gaming. So that's when I was like, hey, Ferme, you want to be a co-caster for this next one? And he said, sure. So I brought him in, and it was basically the exact same deal. It was me and him, and I was observing, I was streaming it. So that was when SCS like first got going. And then after that point, we were like, yeah, it would definitely be really good to expand into the league, like I mentioned earlier, but we also need to get more staff. So one of our other close friends, Galaxis, was really getting into, production. Like she was working on a couple other smaller T4 leagues, but she was blowing their like production quality out of the water. Like she was revitalizing their streams and things like that so well. So we're like, okay, yeah, let's bring her in. And that was like our first major step, I would say, was bringing her in. And then we found Chief, who is a caster for multiple leagues. I think originally he was just with like ESA and NSC. Occasionally he was casting for them.
I believe he
and a
also works
couple
for
others.
SCL. I believe I've casted with him at one point.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, he's done quite a bit with SCL this past season, but we started taking a look at him, and I reached out, and he was definitely interested in getting involved. So he's been our longest, retained caster. And then we started finding more analyst staff as well. Like we brought on Pond, we brought on Smit, Smit is actually a CL analyst. He works in T2 eSports, but he decided, SCS is looking really strong, and he wanted to be a part of it. And then our casting staff too, it's gotten so much bigger. We have let's see, who do we bring on next? We brought on, I believe it was Vial, who works closely with Chief quite a bit. Then Matt, who quite the same. Chief recommended to both of them, and they've been phenomenal for us. After that we got Slayzilla, who is a big, I believe, ESA caster in quite a few other leagues as well. We picked up CDAPS, who's yet again another really big T3 caster right now. We got Blue Panda, who does a lot of things for like ANZ leagues and things like that, because he's actually from New Zealand, but he's phenomenal at what he does, and he wanted to get involved with NA. Al, who is, I believe he's a little bit newer to the casting scene still, but he's been involved in some smaller leagues, and we realized that he's got a big talent. Same thing with Santos. He was one of our newer acquisitions as well. He does college Rainbow Six, but we're like, yeah, we love his casting quality. And then probably one of our biggest pickups too is Sticula. Actually, is very interested in casting for season 4, and he's probably, I would say, arguably the most well-known T3 caster. But honestly, our casting roster has expanded so much now that our scheduling, we're able to not overwork anyone really in that regard. And observers as well. We have Bean, we have Tango Mango, we got Ted, so we're able to swap those guys out, and it's really good. I mean, we've adopted a good scheduling system where everybody sort of works ideally like one game a week in their respective positions, or one day, depending on if you're a producer or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's expanded a lot, and we've gotten a lot of really awesome guys.
Yeah, I've casted with Sticula before. The guy is amazing, honestly. I mean, I've probably never had a better casting experience than when I've been casting with him. He is a phenomenal caster. Like I could certainly agree with you there. He is worth, every cent of his time kind of deal. Goose, said you another question?
Yeah, I have a one quick question real quick, and is what would you say to someone who is about to compete in your league for the first time?
That is good question. I would say come into it with that play to win mentality, because especially with this coming season, there's going to be a lot of top tier competition. There are really, really strong teams, and it's going to be an absolute slugfest in the qualifiers in a very good way. I mean that in the best way possible. Like a lot of our team, it's going to be really, really tight battles here. So I would say definitely come into it with a competitive attitude, but don't be afraid to really get involved with the community. Support your friends that are playing if you make the league or if you don't make the league. Watch all the games, because even if you're not a part of like actually playing in the season, but you still wanted to get involved with qualifiers, there's so much that you can learn from these teams here, in what they're doing. And honestly, that those are probably my two biggest things of advice: is come ready to play and come ready to get involved, because those are our two like mentalities at SCS. Is we love people getting involved like that. So
All right. Well, this has been an amazing interview. I have learned so much from you in these these past this past 40 minutes, I believe it was actually. So,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm just blown away by all the work you've been doing, and it seems like you really are passionate about what you do, and I can really respect that. Anything else from you guys, Goose, Psychotic?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm all good.
All right. Well, this has been the Patch Nose Podcast brought to you by NT Esports. Our co-hosts were Nathan aka Goose and Braden aka Psychotic. We were joined today by our special guest, Saukko, that he is the founder of SCS, the SCS Rainbow Six League. It's a T3 Rainbow Six esports league. If you are watching from YouTube, I would encourage you guys to hit the like button, maybe also hit up the subscribe button. And if you're watching anywhere else, please just follow us wherever we are and make sure you don't miss out. For our next episode, we will most likely have somebody as a shoutcaster for one of these leagues. We're going to go in depth with what it means to be a shoutcaster in those leagues and all of the various details that their job entails. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys later.